Sol 17. Having pulled an all-nighter and staying awake long past sunrise, the two tired astronauts on Mars slept easily, late into the day. Completely oblivious of the chaos they had inspired back on Earth. Teddy Sanders' office, Johnson Space Center, Houston, Texas. Teddy Sanders, Mitch Henderson, Venkat Kapoor, and Annie Montrose were all pulled from their beds early that morning and were currently sitting around a conference table staring at a single image projected on the screen on the wall. It was a satellite photo of the Mars 3 hab and about 10 meters from it, written clearly in Martian rock, two words, one beneath the other. Not dead. ____. Fuck. Annie exclaimed, saying what everyone was thinking. You've got to be fucking kidding me right now. Not helping Annie, the director of NASA said sternly to his director of media relations. How did we even get this image? The Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter went offline this morning for about 20 minutes. 2 hours later these started coming through, Venkat explained, slumped in his chair absently cleaning his glasses. It has to be Johansson, Mitch said. She must have survived the storm. She's the only one with the know-how to reprogram a satellite. And what the fuck is that underneath the not dead? Annie asked, walking right up to the monitor to take a closer look at the image. Whatever it was, wasn't written out in rock like the rest of the image, but looked like it had been carved into the dirt, and as a result wasn't as legible. Mindy said she believes it's a shrug emoji. Venkat sighed, the headache that had started from the moment his phone rang that morning only growing as the day progressed. Who the fuck is Mindy? Mitch asked, his head cocked sideways as he picked the emoji out of the Martian sand. Mindy Park, she works in SATCOM, Venkat said. She's the one who brought these images to my attention. Is she the only other person who's seen these? Teddy questioned. Venkat nodded. Let's keep it that way for now. I'll speak to her, Annie said, still staring at the image on the wall. What about Watney? Teddy asked. Any idea if he is also alive or is Johansson alone? We don't know, Venkat shrugged. Things have clearly been moved around outside of the hab, but there's no indication if it was by one or two people. Since neither appear in the images. The subtext of that statement was that while there wasn't a body in any of the photos, that might not necessarily mean anything. If Watney had in fact been killed, Johansson might have chosen to bury him. Of course it would be our two most popular astronauts we've had since Mars 1. And their popularity mainly stemmed from the fact that they were the first team on Mars. Annie grumbled mainly to herself, her mind already going a million miles a minute as she tried to develop a game plan for the inevitable fallout. For fuck's sake, Montrose, Mitch grumbled. Oh, don't give me that look, Henderson, she snapped when she saw the way the flight director was looking at her. I'm not saying I would have rather had two of the others left behind. I'm saying that the fact that even though he's been a pain in my ass since day one, Watney is the most successful media relations specialist we've had in space for years. He's funny and charming and brought causal public interest back to the program like we haven't seen since the first mission. Every tweet, Vine, and YouTube video he put on the internet went viral. The world felt like they knew him personally and they took news of his death even harder because of it. And Johansson is gorgeous, brilliant and the youngest astronaut we've ever sent to Mars. Girls want to be her, boys want to date her. We've never had to order as many reprints of an astronaut's official poster as we did hers. And since we've announced her death 10 fucking days ago, they've been on back order. This is going to be a PR clusterfuck. Yes, thank you, Annie, Teddy interrupted before she could keep ranting. I think we're all aware of what the ramifications are going to be. However, it is what it is, and now we have to deal with it. Which is why the clock starts now and we need to get as far ahead of the situation as possible. Fine, Annie said, opening up her laptop. How soon do you want to go public with this? We only have, he looked down at his watch, 20 hours before we have to release this image, and I want to know if I'm announcing that we left one or two of our astronauts behind on a deserted planet, Teddy said, sitting back in his chair. I want every satellite we have in orbit pointed at the Mars 3 site. Hopefully we get visual confirmation of one or both of them on the surface, and we can release the images together. Put together a statement for either contingency. That'll be fun, she grumbled. Mitch and Venkat glanced at each other. They might not always agree on everything, but a look of understanding passing between them. The airports the day after Thanksgiving are going to be a fucking nightmare. Mitch sighed, already resigned to it. Kapoor, do you want San Jose or Chicago? What, why? Annie asked, looking between the two men. Watney and Johansson's parents, Teddy explained. They deserve personal explanations before they hear it on the news. Meanwhile, Venkat paused and considered it. Neither conversation was going to be fun. Whoever went to San Jose had to tell Johansson's parents that while their daughter is not actually dead, which is wonderful news, their daughter was left behind on Mars and would almost surely starve before they could do anything about it. And whoever went to Chicago, had to give Watney's parents potentially false hope since they were no longer able to definitely say he was dead. Opening them up to the possibility that they might have to confirm his death all over again in upcoming days, or if he is still alive then just like Johansson he too would starve before anyone could help them. Overall, Chicago was a more delicate conversation, which knowing Henderson meant that he should probably do it himself. I'll go to Chicago, Venkat finally said. Good, I hate a hair. Sol 18. Mission day. Sol 18. Time 11:32. Log entry Watney #004. Pressure 12.48 psi. Oxygen 20.71%. Temperature 20.20 C. Environment HAB terminal. Mark Watney fiddled with the keyboard in front of him, looking distracted until he looked up at the camera at the top of the screen in front of him with a grin. Hey Johansson, he hollered over his shoulder. Get your butt in here, I've got it going. Slow your roll, Watney, Beth called back as she wandered into the room wearing an oversized sweater that clearly did not originally belong to her, cradling a mug of coffee between her hands. I'm right here, she said, settling into the chair next to him, sharing the frame. All right, let's do this, Mark announced, rubbing his hands together, looking directly into the camera. Mark Watney here with. He trailed off, looking at Beth expectantly. She rolled her eyes over her mug, which she was currently drinking out of. Beth Johansson, she supplied her name once she had swallowed her sip. It's currently Sol 18, he picked up, and, obviously, we did not die on Sol 6. He waved his hands for the camera, surprise. Excellent use of jazz hands, Beth smirked. Thank you, he grinned. Anyways, as of yesterday it is our hope that Earth is now aware of our very much alive status. Put a pin in that. We'll get back to how Johansson managed that later, he said as an aside. But it occurred to us that we should probably be taking steps to document our experiences as the first long-term, hopefully only semi-permanent inhabitants of Mars. Either as a record of our actions in case things don't break our way, or to make debriefing when we get rescued a hell of a lot easier. Debriefing is the worst, Beth grumbled into her coffee. That's just because you always fall asleep halfway through, he pointed out teasingly. Just the ones with the physiatrists, she said defensively. They always ask the same question 10 different ways, like they are trying to catch you in a lie. It feels more like a Homeland Security interrogation than a mission debrief. She sighed heavily. It's exhausting. I like how you say that, like you know what it's like to be interrogated by Homeland Security, Mark smirked. Beth's only answer was an enigmatic smile. You have not been interrogated by Homeland Security, he said surely. Have you? Beth grinned at him before turning back to the camera. So we thought now would be a good time to update everyone on what we've been up to the past couple weeks while it's still fresh in our minds. Don't think we're done talking about this, Johansson, Mark interrupted, still hung up on this new potential information. We're going to revisit this conversation later. Whatever makes you happy, Watney, she smirked. Can we get back to this now, she asked, pointing to the screen, her eyebrows raised. Oh right, go ahead, he said with a sweeping hand gesture. He wasn't lying though, he would definitely be investigating the topic further once the camera was off. Thank you, she rolled her eyes at Mark before turning her full attention back to the camera. First thing we want to get clear is that it is not our crew's fault, Beth began vehemently, Mark nodding enthusiastically beside her. They had every reason to believe we were dead and only followed protocol. When we avast on Sol 6 we left the hab in pairs. Watney and I were partnered up, and were bringing up the rear as we made our way to the MAV. Unfortunately, the main communications array was ripped loose from its mooring and stuck me in the back of the head, knocking out my biosensors, before hitting Watney, who was standing next to me as well. I was impaled by the antenna from the dish, which then broke itself off in my side. So not only was my biofeed knocked out as well, the crew also would have potentially seen my suit decompression alarm go off, Mark added, wanting to make sure their crew didn't receive any of the blame for their marooning. I still think it's an odd coincidence that the dish managed to knock both of our biosensors out, Beth mused, getting slightly off topic. I can't help but wonder if there is a design flaw somewhere in the flight suits. We know that they are built to withstand the building G-forces of takeoff and landing, but a single sharp blow destroyed them both. Mark considered her statement for a moment. Something for the people at home to figure out before they send us four out here with the same tech. He addressed the camera and their future audience. I remained unconscious throughout the night, Beth said, picking their story back up from where she left off. And by the time I woke up on the morning of Sol 7, the storm had abated. I had received at least a moderate concussion and a partially dislocated shoulder. You dislocated your shoulder? Mark interrupted. Only partially, it popped itself back in as soon as I put weight on it when I tried to stand up, she said, turning to the man beside her. Didn't you know that? No, he exclaimed. You never told me. Oh, Beth said with a one-shouldered shrug. You were injured so much worse than I was, it must have slipped my mind. Mark looked both doubtful and unimpressed. So all that time you were nagging at me for trying to do physical labor while recovering from an injury, you were hiding the fact that you had dislocated your arm. I wasn't hiding it. It just didn't come up. Like I said, it wasn't that bad, some aspirin to reduce the swelling and cut the soreness and it was fine, she insisted. Can we get back to Sol 7 please, she asked, gesturing to the recording camera. We will be revisiting this later as well, miss. Do as I say, not as I do, he informed her, mentally adding it to the list of things they'd be talking about once they turned off the camera. I'll look forward to it, she deadpanned, looking straight into the camera like she was letting the whole world know just how much she wasn't looking forward to it. Anyways, once I regained consciousness, I quickly noticed the MAV was gone and was able to figure out what had happened. On my walk back to the hab I found this one, she gestured to Mark with her thumb, lying face down in the dirt, half covered with sand. The antenna from the array had enough force to punch through my suit and me, but was stopped by my pelvis, Mark continued, picking up his part of the story. When I rolled down the hill and landed face down, it forced the rod into a strongly oblique angle which put enough torque on the hole in my suit to make a weak seal. Then my copious bleeding did the rest of the work by sealing the rest of the hole as the water evaporated, leaving enough gunk behind that the suit could do its job to hold pressure and keep me alive. So once I realized he wasn't dead, I wanted to keep him that way. She glanced over at Mark, who smiled back fondly. So I pulled the antenna out. Which hurt like a bitch, he felt the need to interject. So I could patch the suit, before getting him up and back to the hab. Which also hurt like a bitch. Where I was able to get the wound cleaned up and stapled shut. Which really hurt like a bitch. Oh, quit your whining, she admonished without any heat. You lived. Look at this terrible bedside manner I've had to put up with. Mark addressed the camera. Really makes me miss the tender love and care of Dr. Beck, he added wistfully. Beth laughed. If you thought my mother Henning was bad, can you even imagine if it was Beck here instead of me? You'd still be on bed rest. Mark didn't even have to think about it. You're probably not wrong, he admitted. He leaned forward towards the camera like he was about to reveal a secret. Dr. Bossy Beck is bossy, he said, sotto voice. She shook her head and rolled her eyes. It's been healing well, other than the time he pulled a staple by being stubborn and not accepting his limits. She glared at him from the corner of her eyes. But there's been no sign of infection, so that's a relief. He ignored her glare, instead leaning back in his chair and pulling up his shirt to reveal the wound site, still a little red and sore, but not inflamed and scabbing over nicely. We removed the staples yesterday, which by the way, also hurt like a bitch, he smirked, but it's nice to have them out. Beth reached out and poked him in the side, which made Mark flinch away, ticklish. Stop showing off your muscles, she teased. We all saw the Under Armour commercial. We all know you're ripped, you know, for a botanist. Well, I've got to show them off while I still have them, he grinned back at her. The way we're eating, they're not going to last much longer. He turned back to the camera. Speaking of that and of my mad botany skills, I guess now would be a good time to transition into Operation Tater Triumph. I'll give you 3 guesses who came up with that name, Beth said, one eyebrow arched. And the first two don't count. Press room, Johnson Space Center, Houston, Texas. Annie was not looking forward to the next few minutes, but she was a consummate professional and this was her job, so she steeled herself before stepping out onto the podium. It was disgustingly early in the morning, but they'd already pushed it as late as they could, past the 24-hour limit of holding imagery as it was. She'd really been hoping to get satellite imagery of Johansson, or Watney and Johansson outside of the hab before her first announcement to the press, but she and or they were not cooperative. Good morning, she addressed the assembled press. I know it's early, so thank you for being here. We have an important announcement, so if you could please take your seats. What's this about, Annie? Brian Hess from NBC asked. Something happened with the Hermes. Please take your seats, she repeated, holding firm while she waited for the reporters to settle. This is going to be a short, but very important announcement. There will be no questions at this time, but we will have a full press conference with a Q&A in about an hour. Waiting for the murmurs to die down, she took a calming breath and continued. 12 days ago we were aggrieved to have to announce the deaths of astronauts Beth Johansson and Mark Watney. However, we have since received satellite imagery from Mars that confirms that at least one of them is still alive. Behind her on the monitor, the image in question lit up in violent color. The room was preternaturally silent as the press took in the not dead emblazoned across the screen. And then the room erupted into chaos.